Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Dave Peltz, and along with me is my esteemed colleague, as always, Dr. Joe Hamlett. And today we're bringing in another guest speaker, Dr. David E. Jackson, to the conversation. Welcome, Dr. Jackson. And today's topic is going to be maximize your space. We had discussed this briefly offline before we got started, and it just really intrigued Joe and I, and we decided that, yep, we're going to run with this. So, with that, following our traditional trajectory of conversation, I'm going to throw this hot potato or large golf ball over to Dr. Joe Hamlett and Dr. David E. Jackson for what they think maximize your space is about.
Well, before we do that, Dave, I would really like Dr. David Jackson to kind of briefly introduce himself, just so our
Oh,
viewers
there
and
you
listeners
go.
kind of know who he is and not just this random person speaking here with us. I'd have him introduce himself first.
Perfect.
Sure. Well, thank you, Dr. Dave and Dr. Joe, for this opportunity to be on with you. And hello to everyone that's watching. It's an honor. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, and I've had a very interesting journey in my life. I was thinking just this week that I have been fortunate to serve in basically every major sector. Brief junkets, but every sector nonetheless, from government to law enforcement to nonprofit to corporate. And what that has done for me is it's given me a very broad perspective on leadership and on purpose. And knowing that regardless of what sector I've been fortunate to serve in, that the purpose doesn't change. And so I'm a person that's really big on understanding that regardless of what space or room that you're in, you have to work very diligently to hold on to why you're there. So that's what I've built my life on, and that's what I've dedicated myself to helping others not get so distracted by the space per se, but be very committed to the why am I in this room.
Wow, that's pretty powerful there, David. So that's and it's actually a lot to unpack when you think about it because of your background and you've had the opportunity to participate in so many different arenas that gives you that broader, high level view of what's going on or what can be going on.
Absolutely. It helps me to, again, I know I keep saying distracted, so there's a reason why I'm saying it. It helps me to not get distracted by the space. Now, that doesn't mean that you do not adjust the skills that you bring to that space to maximize that space or that arena or that industry. But what it does mean that what anchors me to be able to bring the best of myself to a particular space is that I know why I'm in the space. And that's what being in the different sectors has done for me.
Well, oh, I'm sorry,
No, go
Dave.
ahead, Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of times we see is oftentimes people, because of your diverse background, I mean, me and Dave are very similar. We worked in different sectors, different things, but a lot of times that's seen as a detriment when we're, talking to someone across the table, say it's a potential employer or other people that you're trying maybe to help them find their purpose, that they don't recognize the value in that diversity, that all those experiences you bring to the table, and then like you say, being able to manage those space, that all that knowledge experience in those spaces is a huge benefit and a gain for corporations or organizations that are going to hire you potentially. But a lot of times that's not the case. It's if you haven't been in this particular area or field for 10 years or 12 years, you can't be the expert, or you don't have enough to make our organization better. And again, I see that or hear that all the time, that people
Yeah.
are so stuck on, okay, you don't have this checked off on.
Mhm.
Well, I've got all these other things. So don't you see the value in that versus, again, just me being in one area for a long period of time?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I just had a conversation recently, if I could jump in, Dave, I'm sorry, about it's two things there, Joe. Is there's a generational difference between understanding of tenure that we really need to grapple with in the marketplace. And that there's certain generations, generally speaking, that feel that if you haven't given 20 to 30 years in the same
Right.
industry and
Yep.
particularly in the same company, then you're not stable. But then there's younger generations that do not subscribe to that perspective. They
Right.
feel that what makes me diverse and what makes me an asset to your company is the fact that 3 to 5 years, I'm probably going to move on to something else.
Yep.
And that makes me diverse. But there still is, we haven't come to an agreement across generational
Right.
differences around if that makes you stable or if that makes you an asset. Are you an asset or are you a liability? So I think that's one thing that industries are constantly grappling with. I was privileged to be privy to a conversation in a Fortune 50 company recently around their understanding around this tension, and that the current market is either going to make companies say we may not, that practice of being in a place for a short tenure may not be what we have traditionally preferred, but we understand that the market is requiring us to assess our thoughts on that.
Mhm.
And if we want to be competitive in the market in terms of recruitment and retention, that we may need to make some shifts in that regard.
Right.
And so one of the things I tell people, because people consult me often about should I change jobs, how am I going to look, because they know my junket, and I tell them it really depends on the industry. And when you are interviewing, you really need to listen for their perspectives about that, because you're right, Joe. If they approach you and saying, you've been in a lot of places for a very short period of time, I'm not sure about you coming here. That tells you a lot
Right. Right.
about if this maybe is the right place for you or not, versus saying, you know what, we love the fact that you have a diverse background. We just want to make sure, this particular role, we really need someone that's going to commit to be here for 5 years or.
Mhm.
And so I think what that also forces is the conversation around fit, organizational fit, and
Right.
a lot of times when we're interviewing for positions, we're not having the deeper conversations around fit on both sides. What
Right.
does this
Right.
organization need for the person that they're bringing in this role? And what do I, as a person considering this role, needs? And how long am I going to commit to you? And what do I need to be able to fulfill that commitment?
Yeah, and
Right.
that gets to a conversation that Joe and I have had several times, and that's that broad and shallow, if you will, knowledge base versus that narrow and deep, that specialist versus generalist. And there are needs for both in companies. I mean, you might need specialists in different organizational facets, but from a generalist perspective, the beauty behind that Joe and I really like, and I think what you're alluding to is that it gives us the ability to view things from different perspectives, from a much more holistic view, saying, well, that's great. And I've used this analogy before. The food in the kitchen is 5 star, but the ship is sinking. So it's like, if you don't understand what the big picture is, then you can be the greatest you are, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't fit the broader picture. You have to consider those your actions and inactions and how they're going to affect and not affect other organizations and people within the company. So um, you had mentioned maximize your space a couple of times, and that's our topic for today. So I'd like for you to kind of give us an understanding or overview of what you mean when you say maximize your space.
Absolutely. So let me first talk about what is space. When I say space, it means it's the location that you are displaying your abilities in. That's your job. It could be um, your business, whichever way, whatever space that you are placed in, and you're able to demonstrate what you bring to that space. When we get into that space, we have an option. We can either kind of go with the flow of the space. We can bring bare minimum, be mediocre. And I don't say mediocre to be offensive, but some people, they just want to get there, work their 40
Yeah.
They
hours
do.
and go home.
Yeah.
No more, no less, right? But there are some people who know that there's so much that I have to offer that I don't want to just do the bare minimum. I don't want to just punch the clock and then exist kind of under the radar and then go home. there's so much that I have to contribute, not just individually, but in concert with my colleagues, that I want to bring the very best. And that while I'm in this space, I want this space to be better because I'm here. I want this space to increase because I'm here, increase
Mm.
in revenue, increase in impact. I want this space to gain clarity around their vision. Are we in alignment with our vision, or are we experiencing missional drift?
Mm.
So when I say maximize the space, it means that I am making a personal commitment that I'm going to give my all. And as a
Mm.
result of giving my all, this space, this industry, this company, this department, this unit, this sector is going to be the better for it. To the point that when I leave this space, in whichever way that happens, my absence will demonstrate the power of my presence.
That's awesome, David, because again, that's right in line with, our goal of personal and professional development for the show, because that to me translates to transferable skills. We all bring in transferable skills and perspectives. So, I'll use like the IT industry or even the business industry. Every entity out there is a business. It's just what part of business do you fit into? And if you have those transferable skills, that's awesome. And a lot of folks don't realize that they do have a very big toolbox with transferable skills because they're so used to doing the same thing or being told the same thing that they have to stay in their little box versus, well, I could do the same thing but in a different area and maybe I'll be happier. So I like what you're saying about being present in your space, being aware of who you are and what you bring to that space. And yeah, I think that's just awesome. I think of it similarly as when I work with a company, I want to leave a positive footprint there. So
Well, you brought up a very good point, David, at the very beginning when you talked about, people maybe want to just come to work and do their 40 hours and that's it. So, when people are, have that question all the time, well, I want to do this and I want to do that. And I think we may have touched on it brief earlier about, yeah, but you have to make sure it's aligned with first the organization that you want to work for, as well as yourself, because like you said, you may have this intent to come in here, maybe work in this position for 35 years, move on to something else, even within the organization, but that might not be the company's intent. So helping people understand that, yeah, this is my goal, but it may not align with that organization. So you may have to get to a point, and me and Dave have said this many times, you may have to get to a point where you're like, well, this doesn't fit anymore. So I have to go somewhere else. I have to
Yeah.
find that fit for me, because I'm not going to be able to maximize this space here in what I want to do unless I change my focus, my energy, my efforts. And that's not what I want. So I may have to leave. So I think that's the other question with people, because you talk about, oh, this is a great organization, but is it aligned with what you want to do? I mean,
right.
it may be a great organization for somebody else. Like you said, that person that just wants that 40 hours a week, that work life balance, and that's all they want. That might be great for them. But for someone else who has more aspirations and want to do different things, it may not align with you. So I think that's a very good point to make, that people, have to really, and then we talk about this, me and Dave talk about this all the time, is that critical self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a great salary, maybe a great work environment, but it's not really what you want. So you have to really
Right.
define what fits, what's going to make you happy, what's going to, be best for you. So
Yeah. If I one of the things I could say to that point, Joe, that I think is important. I think a part of maximizing our space is we need to critically analyze the space before we step into it. And a huge part of that analysis is, as you all have said, self-reflection.
yep,
We have to be clear about who we are in the space. And a lot of
yep,
times we haven't given ourselves the time or the
right,
space or the resources to figure that out and then make a commitment to stay committed to that. Right.
right,
So
yep,
for me, I know one of my wheelhouses is training. I'm a teacher at heart. I teach without trying to teach. Anyone, if you talk to anyone that knows me, they'll tell you I am constantly teaching, and not in a pedantic way, not in a I know more than you. It's just how
Right.
I'm designed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's my design. And so that is not surprising. Every industry and every position I've held, I always end up in training everywhere I'm going,
Mm-hmm.
like everywhere without fail. I was
Right.
actually having breakfast with one of my former bosses this past week and was sharing with her a new transition at work. And surprisingly, it's in training. And she's like, "Of course, I'm not surprised. That's what you did for me. You
Yeah.
did training. It's who you are."
Yeah.
So with that said, I spent a lot of time understanding why is that the case. Why do I always end up in training? And it takes me all the way back to my North Star statement that I received in college, right? That my design includes teaching. It's a three-pronged design, which includes teaching. And anytime I'm in a room or space that does not lend to me teaching in a way that supports that organizational vision, I'm going to have conflict.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I don't care how great a salary may be, how competitive the benefits are. I don't care if it's a hybrid setup, a remote setup, in office. Those things are secondary and tertiary
Right.
concerns. The primary concern is this space going to allow me this role, more specifically than more generally, this organization, is it going to allow me to be fully and authentically myself? And
That's wow.
if it's not, then I have to make a decision. Am I going to drift from my North Star just because the salary is great
Right. Yeah.
or because of the prestige of the brand and I
Yeah.
want to be associated so I can leverage that at some point? Or am I going to say, I'd rather take a $50,000 pay cut to be in a room that best aligns with my design?
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of people are struggling. And so then they deceive themselves and say, "Oh, I know this room is really not designed for me, but these things or these are the reasons why I'm willing to, ignore that
I can
and
make it work. I can make it
Yeah.
can
work.
make it work." But let me tell you, and I'm sure you all can attest, that doesn't last long.
Not at all.
No.
No,
No.
Yeah,
not
that
at all.
conforming to the space, that mitigating your strengths just so they're to allow them to focus on one thing so you can fit into that one thing
Right.
versus everything else that you bring to the table. Yeah, that's powerful stuff. That's really, really what our show's about is understanding that sort of environment. Why are you there? Like Joe said, that critical self-reflection, and to your point, analyzing that space. So you have to know who you are, and then you have to understand and recognize what that space is. And is it a square peg round hole, or is it a big tree in a forest of cacti? What is it really that you're looking at to try to fit in, or should you not be trying to fit in and just be your authentic self?
Yeah. I put a quote on my social media the other day from John Mark Green, and it says, "When I was younger, not fitting in felt like a flaw. Now it feels like freedom."
Mm,
Wow.
wow.
Yeah, that's pretty
That feels like
powerful.
freedom.
Yeah.
And so and I know what that feels like, and I'm sure you gentlemen do as well, and those listening, because you feel like you have to make yourself fit if it's
Yeah.
Right.
not a
Yep.
fit.
Yeah.
But why?
E-
For what
Exactly.
purpose?
Yep.
For what purpose? But that comes also, some people say it comes with time. I would slightly push back on that concept. It comes with the amount of time you have invested in the self-reflection, right? So
Yes.
here we are coming
Absolutely.
back to that. I
Yeah.
want to tell people I recognize patterns, so there's a pattern here. We keep coming back to the self-reflection because it's important. I hope those that's listening really are taking note of these kind of words and phrases that keep coming up in this conversation.
Absolutely.
Hold on to that. That's something that you really need to kind of think into, hold on to. It's the amount
Absolutely.
of time you have invested in the self-reflection. And in that self-reflection, those are some hard conversations we have to have with
We
ourselves.
really are.
We
Yeah.
have to be honest. This above all to thine own self be true. We have to be honest. Is this about money?
Mhm.
Is this
Right.
about being seen as important? Is
Mhm.
this about proving a point to someone who said that we couldn't be such and such? And so I'm going to prove that I could do it, but it's not your design. And
Right.
like you said,
Right.
Dave, we mitigate so much. We put so much at stake when we don't have those hard conversations with ourselves around motive and intention. Um, that we could not only put ourselves in a space that's not designed for us, but ultimately we impact that entire ecology.
And you
Right.
tend to lose yourself too, and you lose your perception of your own self value, and you question, did I do something wrong, and why am I different? But to your point, once you accept who you are and what you really want and how you really fit and where you fit, it is freeing because it allows you to explore and be your authentic self. It allows you to, have these conversations not only with yourself but others, and say, hey, I could do great work here, but maybe it's not a good fit, whether they're intimidated, whether they feel threatened, whether they, just don't think that you're the right person because of the cultural differences that you bring or organizational perspectives that you bring. Some companies are just satisfied with status quo and having people in seats. Other people, high performers, want to be challenged. They want to have that opportunity to spread their wings with other people and really lift that company or that department or that organization up. And when we talk about that self-awareness and that critical self-reflection, like you said, David, it can be a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people to realize I put all this work into being at this point only to realize it's not really where I want to be. I
Right.
mean, we've all
Yep.
heard the stories of people that say, oh, I'm going to become a this because my parent was that, and they get there and they're like, this is not what I want to be. I can't
Yep.
stand it.
Well, yeah, and I
Absolutely.
appreciate you bringing that up, David, too, because if you go back and listen to or see any of the previous episodes, probably 90% of them, critical self reflection comes up because you can't really get started. You can't move forward until you really define what that looks like for you, what space you're in today, what space you want to be in. So until you find that or define that, you're going to struggle. And I also like the idea that you talked about, finding your North Star, what your purpose is, what you gravitate to. And very similar to you, I know I'm an educator to some degree. I have to train, coach, mentor, but some way I'm going to provide other people with something that I know that I'm passionate about. So yeah, me and my wife were just having this conversation just the other day. I'm working for this current organization. I'm doing these types of things, and then, if I think back 7, 8 years ago, I was doing those exact same things. So,
Yeah, so patterns. Yeah.
exactly. So,
Which we discern and discover and uncover in
absolutely,
reflection. I love what John E. Dewey says. He says we don't learn from experience, we learn from the reflection on
Yeah.
our
yep,
experiences.
Yeah.
yep,
Again, going back to that time. Another thing I would love to add is going back to organizational fit and the self-reflection. There are some spaces that say they want a person like you in the space,
yep,
but they really don't know what they're
right,
asking for.
Yeah, they
And
don't
so
know
if
what
I
they're
can give
asking for.
any
They're like, oh yeah, you'll be great. And then they're like, what do I do with this person?
right, they bit off more than they can chew. And let me tell you,
exactly,
I have heard that phrase a lot in my career. And so one of the things I've learned about maximizing space is really paying attention to the spaces that I think I want to go into to make sure that they don't have a romantic idea of what they want. They have a
yeah,
real understanding. When I say romantic, I mean it's not a fairy tale, it's not imaginary, it's not something that's only been worked out within their mind.
Right.
So one of the things I ask a lot of times when I've had interviews is, based upon my resume and the experience that we've had in this interview, can you describe somebody like me or with my background that's had this role? Tell me, what did they do well and what were areas of opportunities?
Yeah, one of
And a
my
lot of people, they're like, no one has ever asked me that. Mm-hmm.
right, yep,
That's a mouthful right there.
yeah, yeah,
Right. And so, which I always tell people, I always ask questions. Don't just ask questions to be asking questions. Your question is to interview this organization and this role for fit.
absolutely,
absolutely.
yep,
Yeah.
You're not the one being interviewed only. It's a two-sided interview here.
right,
And so I asked that question because that lets me know, oh yeah, we had someone named Lisa, and Lisa was blah 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 blah. And she, in fact, from talking to you, remind me a lot of her. These were her strengths, and these were areas of opportunities. Or I'd be like, we've never had anybody like you, but we want someone like you. Now you have to make a decision.
Right.
Are you willing to go off of their romantic idea of wanting somebody like you? Or do you say, thank you, but no thank you?
Right.
I will
Yeah.
Right.
pass.
Yeah. It
Because
reminds.
too often,
Yeah, it
I'm sorry, no, go
reminds
ahead,
me.
please go
Yeah,
ahead,
yeah.
Dave.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry about that. It
No,
reminds
no,
me
you're
of one
good.
of my previous bosses, and he is a great mentor. He said, when you hire people or bring people into your organization, you need to identify and determine whether they're going to be horses that you need to pull back or whether they're going to be horses that you need to push out the door to keep them going.
Mm,
And it's like that's kind of powerful. And he told me, he said, I would rather have someone have to pull back on doing their job, pump the brakes a little bit versus, trying to shove them to do their job and get in there. It's like it just depends. And I think that's kind of a cool perspective. Are you wanting to bring someone in that you kind of have to push and guide and mold and get them to where you want them to be, or do you want someone that's already halfway down the field waiting for the ball? So
yeah. Well, Dave, one of the things I say to that, in my previous leadership experiences, I would watch people that would be placed in
mhm.
particular roles. And if I had to push them out the barn, to use your analogy, that usually said to me it wasn't right fit. Either
Yeah,
skill
it's a
set
lot of
fit,
work.
maturity fit. It's a lot. There's a misalignment with fit.
Right.
But the people that I'm like, whoa, Nelly, hold up. Those are the people where I'm like, okay, this person's in the right seat at the
Yep.
right time of their life because I don't have to ask for follow up. They are engaged in our coaching cadence, which I think is essential for that self
Mhm.
reflection. If you're not in an organization that doesn't have a regular coaching cadence, that's a red flag for me. Because a part of my self reflection is being able to have a conversation with my supervisor that I can then take with me to my self reflection and can go deeper in whichever modalities I use to do that. But if I'm having to constantly coach you, not skill but around will, then maybe this is not the right fit. So
Yeah.
Right.
I would rather, have somebody down the field going and I'm saying, come on, let's slow down a couple of yards. You're rushing a little too fast. But thank you for at least being engaged. And I think
Yeah.
again, that has to do with maximizing the room. If I have to constantly ask for updates, then perhaps this is not the right room for you. And as a leader, what I've committed to doing is helping people. If this isn't the space for you, the role or the what have you, let's talk about what is. And if I
Absolutely.
can
Have
help
that
you get
conversation.
there, right? If I can help you get there, it may be on this team, but a different role. It may be in a different unit, division. It may be a different organization.
Mhm.
But I
Hey,
think that,
it may be a different sector, but let's find
but I
it.
think that's part of the challenge, though, is having those leaders that are equipped to do that. To say, "Hey, I see you're not fitting here, but maybe you might fit here." And I think that's the challenge when people, go in and say, "I don't think this is working out," or even if the supervisor or leader comes and says, "I don't think you're working out," their results in their not ability or ability not to maximize you turns into you possibly leaving the organization because they don't know how to maybe take what you bring to the table and help you align that with something that fits. So I think that's why people struggle with, okay, I'm going to do my best. I want to do because they're not going to get the feedback they need to send them down the right path, or maybe it'll help them align themselves. And I think that's where a lot of people will try and adhere to, try and change, because they know they're not going to get that from their leader, or it's somebody supporting them saying, hey, I'm going to support you to maybe not stay here, but I'm going to help you over here because you're a better fit here. And I have not seen many leaders that are able to do that or are willing to do that, because now they've got to go through that interview process again and bring in somebody else in. So I think a lot of, on both sides, both, parties might say, hey, well, I'm just going to leave it as is. Hopefully it gets better. And that's what we see in most cases.
Mhm.
So nobody gets to grow.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you, David. We're coming down to the end of the show, so um, I'll ask Joe if he has any final thoughts, and we'll close out with David. Your any final thoughts that you might have? So, Joe, any final thoughts?
No, I just go back to, I mean, we talked about it so many, we've mentioned it so many times, all three of us, just the critical self-reflection piece. I mean, it's going to be really hard to go down a path if you haven't really identified what your needs are, where you are today, what you want to achieve. So not having done that critical self-reflection, it's going to be harder for you to get to where you want to go. So, but I do want to thank Dr. David Jackson for coming on the show. I think you've done a good job of just opening
Absolutely.
up new thoughts, new ideas for people out there that are watching or listening to the podcast. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you both for your warm invitation and for this engaging conversation. We need more of these type of conversations right now more than ever. So I salute you, gentlemen, for your commitment and your diligence to provide this platform. Um, I am very clear about the fact that there has to be a confluence of all of the things that makes me David. And the power of maximizing space is identifying the nexus. Where do all of these things, so my natural abilities, my acquired skills, um, all of these things have to converge somewhere. And when I identify that nexus, that's really where I stand. And I think a lot of people haven't taken the time to identify that nexus. I think people haven't taken enough time to identify Carla Harris, which is one of my kind of heroes in terms of leadership, kind of a boss lady on Wall Street, says, what are the three words that identify you? That aligns with not only your desire, but aligns with the industry and being willing to say those words regularly. So like one of my phrases is that I'm tough, but I'm fair. I am. I'm very tough, but unfair. And that it doesn't matter if I'm in the classroom or if I'm on the floor. I'm going to be tough, but I'm going to be fair. And then the last I would say is also you got to be clear about at the end of the day, what's a win for you? And so for me, I've had to be very clear that for me, again, it has to be a nexus of purpose, impact, and compensation. Those were the three things for me. Those three things, and it can't be just one without all three. It has to be all three. That if I take an opportunity, if I take a moment, is it in alignment with my design, my purpose? Is it going to allow me to make the maximum impact? And is it going to compensate? And compensation is not always money, right? Am I going to feel like at the end of the day, I felt rewarded for what I did? And so I just want to encourage people, these are the type of conversations you need to be engaged with. And the last thing I would say is if you're finding a hard time having these type of conversations with yourself, that's the beauty of having life coaches. If you don't have a coach, you need a coach.
Yeah.
You need somebody who is skilled and trained to help ask you the right questions. That's the beauty of coaching. They're not they're not prescriptive. They're asking you the right questions and they're allowing you to say things that you may have never said or heard yourself say.
Right.
And those are the things that help you get to critical places in the areas I just shared. But again, thank you again for the opportunity. And I hope that this was beneficial to you in some way.
Well,
Absolutely.
thank you. Thank you, Dr. David Jackson, for joining us for this episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. If any of our viewers and listeners would like to reach out to Dr. Jackson, his information is below. We'd like to thank you all again for tuning in and sharing this time with us. And until next time, we want you to keep on being your not so ordinary you.